I am an individual who suffers from a permanent crisis of identity. I never know whether to address you as a historian or as a politician. What I normally do is I try to mix both. You know that the history of wars is replete with cases of major tactical surprises. Think, for example, of Barbarossa, of Pearl Harbor, of Yom Kippur. This one that happened on October 7th was an irrational, suicidal, Daesh-like, utterly senseless response to the possible hubris of an Israeli prime minister that believed that through the Abraham Peace Accords, he has, in fact, canceled the importance, the centrality of the Palestinian problem. He was not sufficiently aware of the volcano of Palestinian rage that was boiling under his feet. And this is how and when we came to this condition. But at the same time, there is a Palestinian continuum, or a Palestinian sort of obsessive repetition of history. Think, for example, of 1947, and then 1967, and then 2000. 3 generations, 3 different modes of combat, of war between Israelis and Palestinians, but all 3 times the wars were preceded by Palestinian grandiloquent pronouncements and popular excitement, as well as broad intellectual support internationally, in Europe and beyond. And all 3 times, as soon as, or even before defeat appeared, the excitement and frenzy were excised from collective memory so that the event came to be remembered as a case of pure cruelty by the hand of the Israeli other. That's the root of the Palestinian predicament in a nutshell. Now, the question that preoccupies popular opinion beyond the Middle East, and also the Middle East, is the question of proportionality, whether the Israeli response is proportional. But proportionality is an odd question, really. This is not a vengeance war. Israel is not conducting retribution. Israel is in the middle of a war. And since when wars were proportional? For example, the war in Yemen by Saudi Arabia, is it proportional to the threat? 400,000 people, according to the UN, died in the Yemen civil war. 60% of them civilians, directly or indirectly affected by the war. Was this proportional? So there is no proportionality when we speak of wars. A different matter it is if it is a feud in the mountains of Kentucky between 2 families or 2 tribes. This is not the case. This is a war. Iran has succeeded in encircling Israel with its proxies. Hezbollah has the firepower of a NATO member, at least. There are militias in Syria, militias in Yemen. Do we have a war with Yemen? The Yemenites just launched cruise missiles against Israel. Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas. And Israel, at some point, had to be triggered to respond in order to break the encirclement. So that's a war. And this is a war that needs also to be seen in its international dimension. That is, it is part of a broader conflict that is taking part between the West, a Western-led alliance, with an alliance of, I would say even a rogue alliance of Russia, China, Iran. This is the alliance that is facing Ukraine, and this is the same alliance that is now at war in the Middle East. So this is the broader context that needs to be seen. Vladimir Putin, from the very beginning of the war in Ukraine, like Stalin in 1941, 1942, 1943, was looking for a second front against the Western alliance. First, he tried the food front. Then he tried the gas front. Then he hoped that something would happen in Taiwan. And now suddenly Israelis and Palestinians have given him a new front. And this is another blunder of our prime minister. He refused to understand what was going on in Ukraine and identify it as he should have identified with the Ukrainians' defensive war against the invasion by Putin. He sacrificed a tactical, disposable advantage, that is the acquiescence by Putin of Israel's attack on Iranian militias in Syria, for the sake of a strategic advantage, which is Israel's belonging to the Western alliance. He finally discovers today that the two fronts are indeed linked. Now we are in an asymmetric war. Asymmetric wars were never definitely won by the stronger side. Look no further. Afghanistan, Iraq, these are even Russia in Afghanistan. The stronger side has a built-in disadvantage because the weaker side has what Secretary General Guterres has finally admitted yesterday. The weaker side has the advantage of the human shield. The civilian population is the human shield. I'm not applauding the death of civilians, but the death of civilians as of itself is not a war crime. The war crime is targeting civilians. And if Israelis have targeted civilians, they have committed war crimes. Then this should be investigated. But there is nothing to investigate about Hamas. Hamas is committing war crimes. Has committed war crimes on October 7th, is committing war crimes against its own population. Are they launching missiles against any military objective? Only civilian objectives. This is clear war crime. The war crimes of Israel perhaps needs to be investigated, but there is nothing to investigate when it comes to Hamas. Now, what is Israel attempting to achieve? This is the major flaw in Israel's behavior in this war. And the flaw is that this is a war with no strategic objective, with no political objective. A wise Chinese, there is always a wise Chinese in the background, said centuries ago that tactics without strategy is the noise of defeat. Israel might win the war militarily, whatever this may be, but then what is the political objective? If there is to be a political objective, it can be made only with a different government than the current government. Israel has formed, or Netanyahu has formed, for his own political survival, a government of extremists, of messianic dreamers. This is the major existential threat to the state of Israel, not Hamas. Hamas will be dealt with. But the fact that Israel is ruled by such a coalition of messianic settlers is a major problem, and how can they have a political strategic interest? They do not have a political objective. And this is where the Americans and the Western alliance needs at some point to help the Israelis define the end game of this war. There are two kinds of end games possible. One is the short end game, that is the immediate aftermath of the war, and the second one is the longer term horizon. In the immediate term, what needs to be done is for the Palestinian Authority to extend its rule over Gaza as well. Now, there is a problem because the Palestinian Authority is known among Palestinians, not just internationally, as corrupt, incompetent, and suffering from a deficit of legitimacy. But therefore, it needs to be sustained and supported by an envelope of Arab states, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, Egypt, Jordan. This should be, for a time, sort of trusteeship with the Palestinian Authority at the middle in Gaza. Now, what is the horizon further on? Normally, the premise or the working premise of the international community is that this should be the two-state solution. This will bring us the peace that we all dream of. I am very pessimistic. Since I have worked in the past on the two-state solution, it seems to me that this represents a problem, both politically and in substantial terms. Politically, I don't see either among the Palestinians or in the Israeli side the possible coalition that can bring this about. Now, Secretary General Guterres spoke about this conflagration as something that did not happen in the vacuum. He's right. The scenes of Israeli occupation are there for everybody to see them. There are no secrets, and Israel could have behaved differently in the lands it occupied in 1967. But there is another perspective, or an additional perspective, another nuance to the problem, and that is, how did we come to the situation whereby we have only war options? Well, one of the possibilities that I offer as an interpretation of the current situation is the serial Pavlovian rejection by the Palestinians of peace offers. Peace offers were made in the year 2000 by the government I was a member in and by President Bill Clinton, and they were rejected by Yasser Arafat. Saudi ambassador in Washington at the time, Bandar bin Sultan, said that that rejection by Arafat was a crime against the Palestinian people and the Arab nations. Not an Israeli said that, a Saudi that was privy to the negotiations. 2 years later, a minister in Arafat's cabinet said, we keep rejecting peace proposals, and then when they are no longer on the table, we lobby the international community to give us that which we had rejected earlier. You know what happened to Nabil Amr? His leg was amputated after being shot at by Arafat's men. In 2008, Ehud Olmert proposed even better conditions than the Clinton peace parameters. He even proposed the internationalization of the city of Jerusalem. Never, ever before has an Israeli prime minister there made such proposals. They were rejected. You know what Saeb Erekat said? I can give you the reference. It is in my book. He said to the chief Palestinian negotiator, said to a Jordanian newspaper, in Camp David, they gave us more than 90%. Now they give us 100%. Why should we hurry to give an answer? After all the injustices that they made against us. He was right about the injustices, but he was criminally wrong in thinking that his nation's redemption can wait for an imaginary peace deal that will never come. So this is the background to fill the vacuum that Secretary General Guterres, he started to correct himself slightly these days, but this is the background. Now, will this war broaden? This is my last reflection. Hezbollah has opened the second front in the north. Again, I was in the government when we withdrew from Lebanon, from southern Lebanon, hand in hand, accompanied by UN observers. We took the measure of the border by the millimeter, and we went back to the international border. So why do we have a war with Hezbollah? If you want to convince Israelis of a two-state solution, you need to explain to them how come whenever we withdraw from lands, we get missiles from that land. We withdrew from Lebanon, we get Hezbollah. We withdrew from Gaza, we get Hamas. And don't be too impressed by the blockade on Gaza. Gaza has an open frontier border with Egypt. And Egypt is not at war with Gaza. So why does Egypt cooperate with Israel in closing the border with Gaza? And if the blockade was such an enormous thing, how come such a military monster was created? A blockade would not have allowed such a monstrous military machine being created. Oscar Wilde once said that the difference between civilization and barbarity is the nuance. And I am puzzled at intellectuals, at liberals around the world that fail to take note of the nuance, of the complexity of the problem. This is not a war between black and white. This is a much more complex affair. And therefore, the Israeli left, that is the supposed bearer of the two-state idea, doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because it was defeated by Palestinian rejectionism. It was defeated in the year 2000. It became a political relic. There is no such a thing as an Israeli left today. It died. It died then, and it died for a second time in this war because it was left alone by its friends in the international liberal left, those who applauded the October 7th attack against civilians, and sooner or later, you cannot conceal these kind of things. Sooner or later, you will be familiar with the images. There is already the documentary that was produced of the unbelievable things that happened along the borders between Israel and Gaza. So the second death of the Israeli left is taking place these days because it has been left alone. On the one hand, the left within Israel is defined by the messianic coalition of Netanyahu as the enemy within. And internationally, nobody sympathized with the dilemma of this left, with the human dilemma of this left, because they applauded. There was a professor in Cornell University that said that the assassination of 1,400 Israelis was an exhilarating moment. This is Cornell. And similar things were heard in Ivy League universities. So the main problem of the left, of the liberal left, is Zionism. That's the main problem. And I think that those who want to contribute to the solution of the Palestine problem, whether in government or in civil society, need to be able to think in a more nuanced way. Now, my heart goes to the Palestinian population. It goes to the Palestinian population because of Israel's response, but because Hamas has chosen the battlefield. This is the battlefield of these days. There are no longer elegant maneuvers in modern warfare. There are no longer glorious victories. Nobody will win in this kind of wars. We are all going to lose. And therefore, this is the battlefield that Israel is conducting its war, and I wish its leaders would be able to conceive a political solution that bears in mind that the Palestinian lives also matter. If they don't matter to their leaders, it should matter to the Israelis, because the future of Israel depends on good governance on the other side. When your neighbor is suppressed by you and by your neighbors at the same time, this is a double suppression, because the Palestinians suffer from Israeli occupation, but also from their own leaders. When this condition continues uninterrupted, there would not be peace for the Israelis as well. And therefore, we need to be able to find a solution to the problem of our time. This is the real existential problem for Israel. It will be accepted by the Arab leaders, but not by the Arab peoples. We can have the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia, with the Qatar, with the Emiratis, what have you. But what matters is the volcano of public rage that erodes the source of legitimacy of Arab regimes, that one day or another might explode in a second Arab Spring against these leaders. So I think that we need to try and reach out to the Arab nations, to the peoples, and to the peoples you can reach out only through some kind of a solution to Palestine's tragedy, to Palestine's plight, and the current Israeli government is not on that line at all. And the sooner we get rid of it, the better for both Israel and the Palestinians. So both Hamas and both the current government need to be toppled as soon as possible. Thank you.